Okay, so first things first here, I've got my little piece of glass, my little scrap glass, ready to go. I wanted something clear so we can see through it and so you guys can really see what I'm doing when I actually draw on it with Sharpie. So first thing we need to do is make sure that we have our cutting oil ready to go. So what I do is put it in this little tiny container, and at the bottom I've got a little cotton ball. So that cotton ball kind of holds that cutting oil and absorbs it so it doesn't make an absolute mess. So I pour a little bit of that cutting oil in there so I can go right in and dip my glass cutter as soon as I'm ready. So what I'm gonna do is just draw some pretty simple shapes just so I can show you guys the basics. Don't judge me for my horrible curve drawing skills. So say this is our stencil. These two black Sharpie lines is what we need to cut out. So putting our Sharpie to the side, picking up our glass cutter, whether you have a pencil grip or a pistol grip, and I'm just going to lightly dab that little tiny glass cutting wheel into that glass cutting oil. So we know that that glass cutter is now fully coated in cutting oil. So I'm going to take my piece of glass, hold my pencil grip cutter just like a pencil, line it up to where I want to cut, and just lightly pushing, following along my already traced line. You don't need to push super hard. You can probably hear, let me take off this bracelet so you're not hearing that instead. You can probably hear through the camera the glass cutter actually scoring the glass. I'll do it over here so you can hear it. That's the sound you want to hear. So you don't need to push super hard, you just need to do a little bit of pressure. So I've already made that first score. Going in and doing the same thing on the second. Now you guys can't see my elbow right now, but what I'm doing as I'm cutting is making sure that this elbow is out and up. You don't want to crush your body in towards yourself. You want to make sure that your wrist is straight. Move the glass to however you need to move it. So you've got your pencil cutter, elbow up and out, and moving around the glass. That way you're not damaging your wrist, your hand, your arm. Okay, so like I already mentioned, you can use the back of your glass cutter to tap along a score line to break it. So we'll do that here. Easy as that. Or you can use your gozers or your nippers. So I didn't hear anything breaking. I didn't hear anything cracking. So what I'm gonna do is use my gozers. So 9 times out of 10, you're probably gonna break your piece of glass using your gozers. That way, that time specifically, I got lucky. So remembering this center line that's in our gozers, if I was to pinch, where is that straight line going? That straight line is going straight ahead, so your glass is probably going to break straight ahead, which is not good. So what you want to do is really take advantage of those nippers. Like I said, I just got really lucky that that broke that way, but that's not the right way to do it. So I'm going to draw another one of those curves so I can show you how these are meant to be used. Again, I hate these and never use them. So my flat side is on the bottom, going in to pinch the glass, thumb is right up against that crack, and pulling it out. It's as easy as that. That's what these nippers are for. Beyond that, like I said, you can use it to kind of grind away the edges, but glass flies absolutely everywhere. I don't see a situation in real life that that would actually be necessary to do. 9 times out of 10, I am not touching those nippers. I am using my gozers. So like you just saw me do here, I just lightly pinched on the edge of this glass, and it went along the score line perfectly. So if you're scoring your glass correctly, that's gonna happen every time. Perfect breaks. This glass is really thin, so it is a lot easier to break than most, but I hopefully am getting the correct idea across. Now again, going back to the running pliers. So lining up that line right along my score, technically it's going to break it in a straight line from the center of your gozers. But because my design is over here, even if this piece did break straight off, it's not affecting the piece I want to keep anyway, so it's okay. Ignoring that, I'm going in and lightly pinching open each end. So again, what I did is went in and lightly pinched each edge open until I heard a little bit of a crack. So we're gonna save this piece to grind and wrap. But again, I want to show you guys what just happened with that. So if I want to, every single time you break glass, you should be sweeping this up. But because I'm just showing you guys on scrap, I'm not. All of this should be swept up every single time you go to make a new cut. Because if you put your glass down on top of a broken piece, it's gonna shatter. So I'm bringing it over here to try to get it away from the broken glass. So again, the most important parts on any really curved piece is going to be those outer edges. Those outer edges is what you're risking by using running pliers to break it open. So I want to go in each side and lightly pinch those edges open so I know it's going to break. So both of those edges were pinched open nicely and it gave me no trouble. I should probably get a thicker piece to show you guys. Hopefully you're not getting annoyed with me, but I want you to really grasp how easy it is to use these versus using your nippers. You hear that? So now that edge is open. And to actually visually confirm it versus just listening, just flip your glass over and look for the break. You can very clearly see, I don't know if this camera is going to be able to pick it up, where that edge started to break right there. So now that I know both of my edges are open, I can confidently go in and break off the piece. Hope that makes sense. So now that we've got our pieces cut, I'm gonna sweep this away so we can get to the grinder. Okay guys, let's get up close and personal with the messiness that is a glass grinder. So, as you can see, here's my grinder. I've got my grinding guard off to the side because I want to show you the inside. So like I said, the inside of your glass grinder needs to have water. This is the water basin of your glass grinder. Now you can see there's a bit of a line where my water is usually at, and there will be a line most likely on the inside of your grinder kind of showing you how high you want your water to be at all times. So beyond just filling it to that fill line, you need to make sure it's clean. So as you can see, this side is scraped out, this side is still covered in glass mud. So you can use something like this to just simply scrape out all the glass mud so it's nice and clean every single time you go to grind. That's gonna help fresh, clean, cool water coat your grinding bit, keep everything cool, and do its job. So I'm just going to clean out the rest of this basin and wet my sponge and we can get to grinding. Because I'm just grinding such a tiny piece, I'm just gonna, on my hands and knees here, get up nice and close. So like I said, I'm just gonna empty out the rest of this junk so our water can be as clean as possible, and I'm just scooping it off to the side in a bin that will be thrown away in the trash, because you cannot just dump this right down your sink or your drain or toilet, because that's obviously going to do some serious damage to your plumbing system. So you need to scoop out the sand and dispose of it properly. So I just need a tiny bit more water here. I'm going to use some of my fresh water I've got off to the side. Going to totally soak my sponge. That's also got nice, fresh, clean water. Now I can put my case back on the top, pop it in place. My grinding bit is nice and tight. When you buy a new grinding bit, it will come with an Allen head for you to tighten on and off. So my sponge is nice and wet. Now we can get to grinding. So you obviously want to protect yourself when you're grinding glass, because glass shards and all sorts of stuff is going to be flying everywhere. So what I do personally is put a shower cap on my head to make sure that there's not going to be glass flying all throughout my hair, because I do have so much hair. I also wear a grinding glass cape, so kind of like a smock you wear when you go to the hairdressers. And most importantly, safety glasses. If you do not wear safety glasses while you're grinding glass, you are going to be in some serious trouble. The last thing you want in your eyeballs is a shard of glass. So because we're doing such a tiny piece, the only thing I'm gonna put on today is my safety goggles. And once I turn this grinder on, you're not gonna be able to hear, so the rest of it from here on out will be a voiceover. Okay, so as you can see, I am just holding my piece of glass and gently pushing it up against the grinding bit. It's truly as easy as that. Same thing here, you do not need to put a ton of pressure on it at all. If you do, it will end up damaging your grinder. So just a gentle push up against the grinding bit will grind it just as much as you need it to. The objective really is to make sure that your designs are cut well enough in the first place that you're not just relying on the grinder to cut off huge chunks and huge sections of glass at a time. You really want to be using this just to touch up any of those edges and smooth them out. And that's it. Okay, so just gave my piece of glass its second bath. As you saw when I was grinding, I dunked it right in that bucket of water to give it its first bath. Then I took it to the sink to give it a nice, fresh water, clean, final rinse. So we've got our piece of glass ready. I've already picked out what type of foil I want to use. So because this is a clear piece of glass, obviously if I wanted to use this in an actual piece, you don't want to see the copper foil through it. So the only way to prevent that is to use a silver-backed copper foil or a black-backed copper foil. So let's just pretend I wanted to keep this piece with silver solder, so I'm going to use silver-backed copper foil. So this part is pretty simple. All it is wrapping your edge of glass in that foil. The most important thing to remember while we're doing it is that all sides are even. So what I mean by that is when I place the piece of glass onto the copper foil, I want to make sure it's an even amount hanging off of each side that's left over. So I'm trying to get it directly in the center of that piece of foil. Sometimes it can be tricky to start off. So directly in the center of that piece of foil, and keeping it perfectly even all the way down the line. So pushing that foil down. I have the same amount of foil hanging off on this edge as I do on this edge. So it's directly in the center. I'm gonna pinch it down onto the glass. Now we're getting to a concave curve. So I'm gonna pull my foil out a bit, making sure I'm directly in the center. I'm not pulling super tight, I'm just very gently holding that and guiding it along the way. Making sure our edge is staying nice and even. And finishing that side. So, because concave edges are a bit more tricky, I'm going to finish the rest of the piece first. So before I try to push those edges down, I'm just gonna quickly do this flat edge since I can go right in and pinch it. And do this rounded edge because I can also go right in and pinch it. Again, I'm going nice and slow, making sure that all my edges are even. We have the same amount hanging off on both sides. And pinch that closed. So, what makes these edges tricky is just, I suppose, basic science. So we're trying to fit this foil that doesn't stretch over a larger space because it's an indented curve. So if I went right in and pinch this close, the foil is going to split. So instead of going right in to pinch that close, this is where your burnishing tool can come in. I'm going to slowly stretch that open. So what this is doing is allowing the foil time to slowly expand and stretch out to fit over this space. Back to the burnishing tool. I've stretched it to fit this space. Instead of buying a burnishing tool, you can use something like this, a wooden stick. And what I'm gonna do is go back in over all those edges and smooth that foil out. See how bumpy and uneven almost that looks? So it's very rough to the touch. Your burnishing tool is going to smooth that foil out, and that is really sticking the foil down to the glass. Flip to the other side, smooth over all that foil. See, again, that looks pretty bumpy and rough to the touch. Take your burnishing tool, smoothing it all out. That's all a burnishing tool does, is really smooths that foil down so it's a perfect adhesion to the glass. So burnishing tool, again, anything that's not gonna risk breaking the glass when you're pushing down on it, like a wooden stick, will work just fine. So, let's talk about these curved in edges and why they can be tricky. What can happen on an inward curve if you don't really take your time to slowly stretch that foil over the edge? Like I showed you earlier, you can use something like a wooden stick or your burnishing tool, or you can use just your finger to kind of warm up that foil and slowly push it out over the edge. But if you don't do that, this will happen. This foil is split all over the place. So let's see, it's got 1, 2, 3, 4 splits. So the problem with the foil splitting, like you can see right here, is that when you go to solder it, it's not going to stick to that split. So you're going to have to go back in to patch this foil, or you can just do it right the first time. Of course, accidents are going to happen, so going back in to patch it isn't going to be a huge issue, but obviously that's going to be more time consuming, especially if you're doing 15 pieces at a time. So you just want to try to do it right the first way. Be patient. Foil isn't meant to be stretched, so just keep that in mind when you're working on these inward curves like this. Okay, so finally getting to almost the end of all of our steps here. We've got our piece cut, ground, cleaned, wrapped in foil. Now we're getting ready to solder. So just like every other step in this video so far, I do have dedicated videos that go more in depth on each of these topics in particular. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but we are soldering. So first things first, I've got my soldering iron heating up, and it's sitting in its stand over here. And in its stand, I have a damp sponge to wipe it off when it needs to be cleaned. So like I had talked about before, when you start seeing your solder tip get gunky or dirty, or if it's not grabbing solder like it should, you know it's dirty, so it either needs to be wiped off or it needs to be tinned correctly. So all of that aside, our soldering iron's ready to go. I'm ready to solder. So for the sake of this video, I'm just using one type of solder, and that is 60/40. So I'm going to take this 60/40 lead tin-based solder, cut a little rod off because that's a lot easier to work with. Grab my flux brush. Again, this is flux, comes in a bottle just like this, but just like my cutting oil, I like to put it in a little jar so it's easier to use. And in this little jar, I've got a little cotton ball at the bottom, and I'm gonna pour a little bit of flux in there. You don't wanna absolutely soak your piece in flux, you want it to have just a little bit. So again, the point of flux is to clean off our foil and to help the solder stick and smooth out properly. So as you just saw, I just put a little bit of flux over all of those copper foil edges. I'm gonna wipe off my soldering iron on my sponge, put fresh solder onto the tip, and just lightly make contact with all those foil edges. So as you can see, the solder is easily gliding right across that foil. It wants to spread itself out, and that's because of the flux. On the other side, I'll show you guys what it looks like if you don't put flux down on your foil. So like I've mentioned before, you don't have to worry about the solder sticking to your glass or anything. The only thing that solder is going to stick to is that copper foil. So we've got that side done. I'm gonna flip it over. So here's what it looks like if you didn't put flux on it. Down here. So all of these spots are not covered in solder, which is a problem. So that means you gotta go back in, hit it with some flux, clean off that foil, and the solder will easily glide across it now, sticking to every single section of that foil. Alright, so now we have to do our inner edges. So sometimes what I like to do if I don't want to have to hold the solder at the same time, I'll kind of bend it like that so it sticks up on its own. And then you can kind of just use that to just pick up a bead when you need it without having to hold it. So now we have to do our edges. Obviously, because I have nails, I can grab onto this piece without burning the crap out of myself. So you're going to need some type of lightweight plier to hold it, or gloves, so you don't burn your fingers off. And I'm going to be doing the same thing across all of these edges. Just lightly touching the soldering iron to the foil and moving quickly. If you stay in one spot too long, you're definitely going to risk cracking your glass. So you want to kind of move quick and just lightly make contact with the foil. Right here, it's having a little bit of trouble sticking because that foil was dirty. So I'm just going in with some flux, and I'm gonna re-hit that edge. Okay, so obviously because we're just soldering a demonstration piece, this is a lot different than soldering a larger full-sized piece. One, because when you have two pieces butt up against each other, you're gonna wanna use a 50-50 solder, then a 60-40 to avoid that solder going down in between any cracks, which hopefully you don't have anyway. Point is, we've got all our edges covered neatly. All of our foil edges are even. Our piece is nice and smooth. So once you get to that point, then you can really start concentrating on making some cool pieces. But I would definitely work on getting the basics down before you do any of that. So now that this piece is soldered, what I would do is take it to the sink and wash it. So I think we are done for today. The last thing I'm gonna do, prep my soldering iron to shut it off. So this is my little soldering iron stand. I know it's messy, but it gets messy. So here's my wet sponge. What I'm doing is cleaning off my tip. And just looking at it to make sure it's still tinned, which it is. It's still nice and shiny metal. I'm gonna put down some nice fresh nice fresh solder and shut it off. That way when I go to turn it on the next time, she's good to go. So I'm gonna leave that beaded up solder on the tip of that, put it away and let it cool down. Okay guys, I think that's it for today's video. As always, thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you liked it and you want to subscribe. Of course, if you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, if you have even any video suggestions, something you specifically want to see, please leave it in the comments down below. I'm always around to answer them and read them. Of course, I'm going to link everything I can find. So anything I use in today's video, I try to find Amazon links for them. I'll link it down below. I'm also going to link my Instagram and my Etsy, so if you want to see my stained glass work and my stained glass business, go check me out over there. If not, I'll see you next time. Wash your hands and stay safe. Bye.